Yeah, again, that was just to sort of go through the requirements for the course, basic structure of the course. I'd like to say a little bit about what the course will be about and how we'll approach the subject of death, the philosophy of death, really. Best thing to do to get a sense of how we'll do that is to take at least a preliminary look at the readings, kind of readings that we'll do. They're philosophy readings, and they, I think, address the biggest philosophical questions there are about death. I mean, not perhaps not. This is an accelerated course. There are a few other things that I would have liked to pursue, related questions, but they're just in a 6-week course. If you try to jam too much in, I think it's counterproductive. But we will ask the big questions. Epicurus really gives us, in a few sentences, actually, kind of a comprehensive philosophy of death, in the sense that he tells us what he thinks death is, which is important. And then he tells us how he thinks that we should regard it, how we should deal with it in our lives. And really, that's kind of what the course is, in a broad sense, the nature of death and the significance of our mortality to our lives, to how we think about ourselves, to how we decide to live our lives, to our relationships with other people. The big questions. What it's not is kind of like a death and dying class in the sense of a psychology class, or a class that's oriented towards grief counselors or people in the health professions. That would be another approach, which is perfectly fine. It's just not the approach that I'm taking. So you won't get any of the Kubler-Ross, stages of grief sort of thing. I mean, that's just not what I do. I am relying much more on mainstream philosophical thought, Western philosophical thought on death. So the first 2 weeks really form the first unit of the course, Epicurus' philosophy of death, and then Thomas Nagel's objection. Basically, his objection to Epicurus' idea that death cannot be considered a bad thing for the person who dies. He's defending what he considers to be the more natural or common sense position that death certainly is a bad thing, the worst thing that can happen to somebody, at least sometimes. So that will be, getting a handle on both why Epicurus would say such a thing, that death is not a bad thing for the person who dies. Not a good or bad thing, he says, but it's definitely not a bad thing. And why Nagel, his reasons for thinking that that's a mistake, that certainly, at least in some cases, that death can be considered a bad thing. Then we broaden things out. Weeks 3 and 4 are reading 2 different essays by 20th century philosophers Hans Jonas and Glenn Gray, which are interesting essays that really aren't so much about death as about mortality, which is, of course, a related concept, very close concept. Jonas's essay, The Burden and Blessing of Mortality, where he basically says, why is it that it's both? He tries to argue that certainly mortality, which is the fact that we will die as living things, is a burden that we carry, but it's also a blessing, and he has reasons for thinking both. Very interesting essay. Glenn Gray's The Idea of Death and Existentialism is really an essay trying to interpret these 20th century, basically German existentialists, why they consider death the way that they do. And one of the most important things we'll get out of that essay is his description of Martin Heidegger's characterization of human existence as a being towards death. both important and interesting in its own right, but also leading to the third part of the course. But what you'll do in weeks for your second essay is choose one or the other to write about. And then the last part of the course will be 2 weeks looking at a fairly long text here. This is Paul Landsberg's The Experience of Death, which is a long essay. And we'll read it over the last 2 weeks of the course. Probably read sections 1 through 4 for week 5, and then the rest of it for week 6. It really takes more than a week to really get a sense of what Landsberg's getting at in this essay, very dense essay, wonderful essay, one of my favorite things ever written on the subject. Certainly is this wonderful essay by Paul Landsberg. This will be your third and last essay, and really just a general assessment on your part of what you think of Landsberg's thought. Landsberg was trying to describe what he called the experience of death, and for various reasons, we'll see that that's rather paradoxical. For instance, Epicurus said that death is the end of all experience, so there is no experience of death. So Landsberg, who was a very interesting Catholic thinker, who died tragically, he was in the resistance against the Nazis in France, died tragically in a concentration camp. Really wonderful man, a wonderful thinker, and really one of the best, I think, attempts to develop a Christian philosophy of death, what I would think is a Christian philosophy of death. So we'll spend the last 2 weeks exploring. I've called it Paul Landsberg and the philosophy of hope, because that notion of hope turns out to be the central concept. That we'll see why he says that, but basically he is perhaps the one author that we'll read who has a firm commitment to something like an afterlife. Well, to an afterlife, to a continued existence beyond death, which is not seriously considered by any of the other authors that we read. So he's an interesting figure. And we'll spend 2 weeks reading his essay, The Experience of Death. So again, as I said in the earlier video, the best thing you can do for this course is to spend a lot of time reading the text. Take a look at the videos. They should help. They provide some kind of framework for approaching these texts, some ideas. But most of it is really you reading the text. And, you should use the discussion board as much as you can, putting your own thoughts down there and seeing what other people are thinking. That'll definitely help. And as I said again in the earlier video, feel free. You should take the initiative. This is your course, and these texts are there as your assignments, really. It's getting a good grasp of them. They're not easy texts. The videos are there to help, but it takes a lot of work on your part, and the quality of your essays will, to a large extent, be a reflection of how well you understand these texts. So you should take the initiative if you have problems, and contact me. I am here to do that. I've already given you these videos as an attempt to provide some helps, but I'm available for individual discussion. So please, I'm sitting here in my kitchen waiting for you to email me or call me. So please do so if you want to discuss any aspect of the course, and especially if you want to discuss the text. That's the main thing. That's my main job. So I hope that this gave you some sense of what will be kind of questions we'll be exploring in this course. It's a very fruitful enterprise to spend some time thinking about this subject and to get a sense of what these great philosophers have said. So good luck. And again, contact me whenever you wish, and I'll see you.